Happy Saturday night, everyone. Even if you're not happy, I guess maybe try to be. It is a difficult time for the country, and I'm sure that you're feeling the uncertainty really close in on you. But the fact is that you have to keep on living, and unfortunately, pain is a part of life. And one of the biggest pains I think that we have to get over and overcome, in fact, is that the information that we get from the press is generally curated in order to emphasize what is desirable for the people who own these corporations and conglomerates and hide what they find is inconvenient, what is against the goals that they are trying to promote for society. So, my latest piece, we'll get to it. It is with American Greatness. And I do have another piece that is in the pipeline with them. But I want to, of course, talk a little bit about the need for you to start subscribing to alternative technology. Alt tech sites are basically your refuge from the control over the information that others have over what you consume. That's basically the point of ending your dependency on Facebook, Google, Twitter, and going to things like Parler, Gab. People forget about Gab and Minds.com. So those are places where you can share your own content. But if you want to get news from sources like myself, I have a newsletter that goes out. It's called Razor Sharp News Chronicle. It shows up as Razor Sharp Reports sometimes, but subscribe here. I will put the link in the description, other links in the description. You can find my new design. You see it behind me, but it is the I got your press pass right here t-shirt. And besides that, I want you to subscribe to me on Odyssey. Okay, you can find me bold like a leopard, just like it appears on Facebook. On YouTube and on Facebook. You can find me also Chef Leopard on BitChute and Chef Leopard on Rumble for video content and help us break the blockade. Anyway, this is a story I wrote about. I actually think I started writing it before the election, and I finished it in the week after the election. And it related to Miles Taylor, who is this former Trump administration Homeland Security official who, for I think it was 2 years, was stringing the media along, telling them that he was this official within the Trump administration who was undermining its policies from within and obstructing and fighting him, and basically an internal resistance that was guiding the country when the president was unstable. And the reality is that once his identity was revealed, because originally they published him as anonymous, people started to say, wait a second, we've been taken for a ride, including the New York Times, which could have said that at the time they could have at least given a hint as to who is, like, first of all, the whole premise of publishing an op-ed by an anonymous person and having them pretend to be a senior official in the Trump administration, which calling him a senior official is a little bit debatable. He was the chief of staff to Kirstjen Nielsen. She was she was the head of the Homeland Security Department. She was the Secretary of Homeland Security after I think his name was he was chief of staff to Donald Trump. General Kelly ended up moving over to the White House, and she took his place. And the fact is that he may have been, to some degree, senior within the Department of Homeland Security. Chief of staff of a department is certainly a senior position, but to say that he was this massive figure, somebody who was on the par of Deep Throat, who ended up being the second in command of the FBI and leaked all of the secrets of the Watergate break-in to the Washington Post, to say that it was the same degree of seniority and authority is laughable. And I'll explain why. Okay? When a reporter is consistently so close to the spotlight that the audience begins to recognize him, it is easy to start taking advantage of this position for self-promotion. This is by no means a phenomenon unique to the Trump era. In 1986, Geraldo Rivera produced a live special where he for the first time revealed the contents of Al Capone's vault. The sensationally promoted program became instant self-parody when the chamber ended up containing only, quote, an old stop sign and some empty gin bottles. Geraldo admitted years later that this humiliating turn of events made him the object of ridicule for years, but that the ratings, the bonanza that resulted from it became a permanent fixture in the history of news reporting. And then this was the birth of the trash TV era. So you have to remember that if you grew up in the 90s like me, this was already like the heyday of Jerry Springer and Maury Povich and Jenny Jones and Sally Jeffrey Raphael. Those people, they had every single network had one of these people. They would have a panel on the stage and basically these insane conversations that would take place where eventually there would be blows exchanged and things like that. That was the trash TV era, and it was all started by things like what Geraldo did and what Phil Donahue would do. And in fact, the media started to turn against this, but instead of actually abandoning trash TV tactics, the media ended up basically adopting some of them. So, back to the topic at hand. The Miles Taylor saga is an excellent example of how the legacy media has become just an outgrowth of the lousy work of the Geraldos and Jerry Springers of yesterday. The New York Times, I am part of the resistance inside the Trump administration, which is the name of the story, went viral at the time and gave the impression that within the halls of the White House, Pentagon, and other executive agencies, a secret group of officials dedicated to upholding the values of the Republic were resisting Donald Trump. There was immediate criticism not only of the op-ed, but of the decision to publish it anonymously. Kelly McBride, Senior Vice President of the Poynter Institute, a journalistic ethics and standards think tank that is certainly no apologist for the White House, wrote that if this had been a news story, we would have insisted on more details. But the debate over this publication was empty of any teeth. There would be no consequences whether the Times peers approved or disapproved of it. They would continue to cite the Gray Lady as an authoritative source regardless of whether its own sources were credible or not. So for those of you that don't know, the Gray Lady is the nickname of the New York Times thanks to its status as an authority publication. The original publication was released in the week prior to when Bob Woodward's best-selling book, Fear, Trump in the White House, dropped, possibly hoping to capitalize on the hype surrounding the Watergate reporter's, quote, insider perspective. A year after the op-ed, its author wrote a book called A Warning that was timed to be released in November, just as the Ukraine controversy that would lead to Trump's impeachment was at its zenith. 2 months earlier, Miles Taylor left the Department of Homeland Security. At the time of publication and until today, its publisher never disclosed whether Taylor was still working in the administration or not, and until October 2020, he vehemently denied his authorship of both the op-ed and the book. So what do we have here? We have a person who for 2 years made these efforts to portray himself as some person who was doing all of these various things in order to stifle the Trump administration's policies. But the truth is that there's no actual evidence that that happened. And people are smart enough to know that. So here we go. This is another thing I put in. Is it any surprise that once again a story like the revelation of Taylor's identity coincided with the climax of the 2020 election and the deliberate smothering of the Hunter Biden laptop scandal? If he was expecting gratitude from his chosen camp, Taylor must be sadly mistaken by now. After 2 years of fantasizing that perhaps Trump was being thwarted by a suave mole from within the halls of his own house, thereby affirming his ineptitude, the vultures of the anti-Trump media are more than aware that they were hustled by a simple con game. The New Yorker's Masha Gessen, who is, by the way, a major anti-Trump person, responded in an article titled, "If we are going to recover from Trumpism, we must deny charity to Trump's henchmen." Gessen's message was that association with Trump taints one irreparably, a clear moral condemnation coming from someone who herself was an unrepentant Russiagator. But Gessen makes the point that Taylor's writings of, quote, resistance were made with a wholly self-serving motive in the hope of preserving or even furthering his career in the event that his gamble of a Trump loss came true. And then the rest of it, I'm just talking about more some of the context of the past. You have Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. They've lived on the Watergate. Um, they've lived through the hype of that for years. Watergate was the largest journalistic scoop of its era and possibly of the 20th century. So you have these two guys, Washington Post writers, and supposedly they broke the biggest political scandal in the history of the country. Some people, and you can look at other people on YouTube. Lionel Nation used to talk about this. Although I don't listen to him anymore anyway. But they used to talk about the fact that they were basically working on behalf of the deep state itself in order to torpedo Nixon, who wasn't really living up to what they were trying to do. They were trying to basically continue the war in Vietnam, do things like that. And Nixon eventually ended the war in Vietnam, despite all of the other things that he did that enabled them. He did that one thing that pissed them off. But in any case, so Woodward and Bernstein have lived off of that accomplishment for many years. But they themselves are not immune to getting suckered too. In 1981, as the Post's Metro desk editor, Woodward was suckered by a young reporter named Janet Cook, who submitted a fabricated story called Jimmy's World about an 8-year-old heroin addict. Thanks to Woodward and others, Cook earned a Pulitzer that had to be returned. Meanwhile, Bernstein is known by commentators as the worse than Watergate guy for his trademark statement of outrage about figures and events that he finds scandalous. What's worse than Watergate is that as the United States nears the 50-year anniversary of the journalistic scoop that brought down a president, the press is now the protector of the powerful rather than their tormentors. While Taylor peddled his vapid and useless drivel through them, they ignored the work of Peter Schweitzer, an investigative journalist who helped expose the dark money connections of many powerful political families on both sides of the aisle. So I'm going to say that if you want someone who is really, he doesn't pull punches in terms of exposing political corruption, Schweitzer is one of the few journalists out there. He actually, in his book, I think it's called The Princes, he goes after not only the Clintons and the Bidens, he goes after Mitch McConnell pretty hard. And that really is the show of someone who he's not indebted to either party. I think he also went after Jared Kushner, if I'm not mistaken. So this is a person who is very dedicated toward exposing family ties that intertwine with government corruption. So this will be on the newsletter, and I want to remind you again before I close, subscribe to the newsletter, go to the Etsy store, subscribe on Odyssey or Library, whichever one, on BitChute and on Rumble, and have a great day.